Okay, so you want to buy a professional sports team. You've got the private jet, the art that nobody's allowed to touch, and now you want your name on the side of a stadium. Here's the strange part though. Almost every team you could possibly buy loses money on the actual business of playing sport. And yet there is a permanent queue of billionaires elbowing each other to pay record prices, and those prices keep roughly doubling every few years. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how a business that barely breaks even on paper turns ordinary billionaires into some of the richest men alive, why the real money has almost nothing to do with winning a single game, and why a sports team might be the only asset on earth that loses money most years and still makes its owner richer the entire time. Let's start where you always start, with the price list. And the first thing to understand is that not all leagues are the same business. They are not even close. Right at the top, the single most expensive sporting property on earth sits America's National Football League. In 2023, a group led by the private equity billionaire Josh Harris paid $6.05 billion for the Washington Commanders, a team that had won precisely nothing of note in 3 decades. A year before that, the Denver Broncos went for $4.65 billion, and neither of those is the crown jewel. Forbes values the Dallas Cowboys at well over $10 billion, which is more than most car manufacturers are worth. There are only 32 of these teams in the whole world, and the league has not added a single new one since 2002. The supply is frozen solid. The demand is a line of the richest people alive. One rung down, you find the NBA, basketball. The Phoenix Suns sold for $4 billion in 2023. The Boston Celtics were sold in a deal valuing the franchise at over $6 billion. Then comes baseball, then ice hockey, and only after all of that, despite being comfortably the most popular sport on the planet, do you finally arrive at European football. And this genuinely surprises people. The biggest football clubs on earth are global cathedrals watched by billions, and they still change hands for less than an American basketball team in a mid-sized city. In 2022, Chelsea, a Champions League winner sitting in the middle of London, sold for £2.5 billion. Manchester United, arguably the most famous club in the entire sport, was valued at around $6 billion when Sir Jim Ratcliffe bought a quarter of it. So why on earth does an American football team cost more than Manchester United? Hold that thought, because the answer is the whole point of this business. When you buy a top American team, you are not really buying a sports team at all. You are buying a membership card to a cartel. And I mean that almost literally. The NFL is a closed league. There are 32 teams. There will only ever be roughly 32 teams. And the men who already own them decide whether a 33rd is ever allowed to exist. If you want in, you cannot simply build a brilliant team and earn your place. There is no earning your place. You have to wait for one of 32 people to sell, and then you have to be approved by the other owners, who are allowed to reject you for almost any reason they fancy. This is a club, in every sense, and the club decides who joins the club. That is the first thing that makes the price make sense. You are not paying for the players, or the stadium, or even the trophies. You are paying for one of a permanently fixed number of seats at a table that prints money. And because that number can essentially never go up, the price of a seat only ever travels in one direction. There is one charming exception to all of this, by the way. The Green Bay Packers are owned by their own supporters, hundreds of thousands of ordinary shareholders, the only community-owned team in major American sport, and the league has quietly made sure that nobody is ever allowed to do it again. So where does the actual money come from? The instinct is to say tickets, fans, hot dogs, replica shirts. And all of that is real, but it is not the engine. The engine is television. In American sport, the league bundles the national broadcast rights for all of its teams into one enormous package, sells it, and then splits the check equally between every team. The NFL's current media deals are worth more than $110 billion across 11 years. Divide that between 32 teams, and each one collects somewhere north of $400 million a year from television alone, before it has sold a single ticket, a single beer, or a single jersey. Sit with what that actually means for a second. The Dallas Cowboys and the single worst team in the league receive exactly the same television check. A team can finish dead last, play in a half-empty stadium in front of a furious city, and still be wildly profitable, because the biggest line on its revenue sheet shows up automatically, in an equal share, whether or not a single human being in that building actually wanted to be there. They call it revenue sharing, and it is about the closest thing modern capitalism has ever built to a guaranteed income for the very rich. On top of that national money, you keep your local revenue, and this is where the real showmanship lives. The luxury suites that corporations rent for hundreds of thousands of dollars a season. The naming rights, where a bank or an airline hands you tens of millions a year simply to bolt its logo onto the roof. Club seats, car parking, concessions, local sponsorship. A modern stadium is not really an arena. It is a shopping center that happens to host a game about 20 times a year. Now for the costs, and the biggest one is obviously the players. This is exactly where American sport and European football split into two completely different universes. In America, almost every major league runs a salary cap, a hard legal limit on how much each team is allowed to spend on its roster. And crucially, that limit is tied directly to league revenue. In the NFL, every team spends roughly the same on players, and the owners, collectively, simply agreed amongst themselves never to let wages run away from them. It is a beautiful arrangement if you happen to be an owner. Your single largest cost is capped by the rules. Your single largest revenue arrives in the post, and the gap between the two is a profit that is protected by the very structure of the league itself. Now look at European football, where there is no salary cap at all. Clubs fight for the best players in an open, global, never-ending bidding war, and wages spiral upwards forever. It is completely ordinary for a Premier League club to spend 70, 80, even 90% of everything it earns on player wages. Some of them spend more than they earn. That is a huge part of why those famous clubs are cheaper. You are not buying a money-printing membership card. You are buying your way into an arms race that never ends. And then there is the trapdoor that does not exist in America at all: relegation. In European football, if your team finishes in the bottom three, it is dropped into a lower division, and your television money, your sponsorship deals, your entire financial model can collapse almost overnight. One miserable season on the pitch can wipe hundreds of millions off the value of your asset. In the NFL, you can be hopeless for a decade and your franchise still quietly doubles in value. In England, a single gray afternoon in May can ruin you. That, in one word, is the difference between buying into a cartel and buying into a genuine competition. There is also the small matter of how you actually pay for the thing, and here is a proper cautionary tale. When the American Glazer family bought Manchester United back in 2005, they did not really use their own money. They borrowed most of it, and then, in a maneuver that still makes supporters furious 20 years later, they loaded that debt onto the club itself. United, not the Glazers, became responsible for paying back the loans that were used to buy United. The club has bled well over £1 billion in interest and dividends since, money that could have bought players, while the fans have spent 2 decades protesting in the stands. Borrowing to buy a trophy asset is one thing. Making the trophy pay for its own purchase is a darker art entirely, and it works right up until the moment that it doesn't. But here is the twist that makes this whole strange machine actually work. And it is the part almost nobody outside the industry truly understands. The operating profit, the money the team makes year to year, is very nearly beside the point. The real money is the appreciation. In 1981, a man named Donald Sterling bought the Los Angeles Clippers, one of the most badly run teams in all of basketball, for around $12.5 million. In 2014, after he was caught on tape making racist remarks and the league forced him to sell, Steve Ballmer, the former chief executive of Microsoft, bought those exact same Clippers for $2 billion. $12 million to $2 billion. For most of the years in between, the team was a national punchline. It did not matter even slightly. The asset itself climbed roughly 160 times over. Or take the cleanest example in the entire sport. In 1989, Jerry Jones bought the Dallas Cowboys for $140 million, and half the sport told him he had wildly overpaid. That team is now worth more than $10 billion. He could have lost money on operations every single year of his ownership and still be remembered as one of the great investors of his generation, purely on what the franchise itself quietly became worth while he held it. And there is one more piece, a quiet and genuinely gorgeous piece of tax engineering that turns losing money on paper into a positive advantage. When you buy a team, the tax authorities let you treat a large chunk of the purchase price, including the value of all those player contracts, as an asset that wears out over time, exactly like a machine in a factory. You then get to deduct that imaginary wear and tear against the income from your other businesses. So an owner can buy a team, watch its real-world value climb every single year, and at the very same time report a paper loss that shelters his income from everything else he owns. He gets richer in reality and poorer on the tax return simultaneously. A baseball man named Bill Veeck is widely credited with pioneering this trick decades ago, and it has been quietly subsidizing the ownership of sports teams ever since. This is also why an entirely new kind of buyer has turned up at the table. Not businessmen hunting for a return, but nation-states hunting for an image. When Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund bought Newcastle United, or when Qatar took control of Paris Saint-Germain, a healthy operating margin was never remotely the goal. The goal was soft power, a global audience, a warmer headline, a seat at the world's most watched table. To a fund quietly managing hundreds of billions of dollars, the price of a football club is a rounding error, and the prestige is simply priceless. And when the rival bidding against you for an asset is an actual country, the price stops obeying any of the ordinary rules. So it all sounds perfect. A capped cost, a guaranteed television check, an asset that only climbs, and a tax break for the privilege of losing money. So where is the catch? There are a few. The first is that you never quite own the thing. You own a membership, and the membership comes with rules. Donald Sterling discovered that the hard way. Say or do the wrong thing in public, and the other owners can vote to force you to sell your own team whether you want to or not. You are a billionaire, but you are a billionaire on probation. The second is the stadium. A modern venue can cost $2, $3, even $4 billion to build, and owners have spent decades persuading cities to pay for them with public money, arguing that a team brings jobs and pride and prestige. Economists have studied this for years, and very nearly all of them agree that the public almost never gets its money back. But when a city finally refuses to pay, that bill lands squarely on you, and it is colossal. The third risk, in Europe, is everything we have already said. No cap, no guaranteed money, and that trapdoor marked relegation sitting under your feet every single season. So let's actually run the numbers, the way a real buyer would, with two scenarios. Scenario 1, the American model. You pay $5 billion for an NFL team. On pure operations, in a good year, you might clear a couple of $100 million in profit, sometimes a great deal less. As a return on $5 billion in cash, that is modest, the kind of yield that would genuinely embarrass a boring office block. But that is not why you bought it. Over the last 20 years, the average NFL franchise has multiplied in value many times over. Buy in at $5 billion today, and recent history says that in a decade or two, it could be worth 2 or 3 times that, all while a tax deduction quietly shelters the income from the rest of your empire. You barely make a thing running it. You make a fortune simply owning it. Scenario 2, the European model. You pay $2 billion for a famous football club. Now your largest cost, wages, is uncapped and rising every single year. To stay competitive, you have to keep spending, and the very moment you stop, you risk the one outcome that destroys everything: relegation. In a brilliant year, with a deep run in the Champions League, you might post a small profit and watch your brand grow right across the planet. In a bad one, an injury crisis, a managerial meltdown, 3 rotten months in spring, and you are staring down at a lower division and a valuation in freefall. Same 2 words, sports team. Two completely different businesses. So step right back and look at the whole picture, because the economics of owning a sports team are very nearly a paradox. On the surface, this is a business that barely turns a profit, that employs 100 multi-millionaires who, by the basic mathematics of competition, lose roughly half their games no matter what they do. And that depends entirely on the moods of fans and the bounce of a ball. By every normal measure, it is a genuinely terrible investment. And yet, it is also one of the most reliable ways the modern world has ever invented to turn 1 billion into several. Because you are not really buying a team, you are buying scarcity. A permanently limited number of trophies that every billionaire, every corporation, and now every country on Earth desperately wants to own. Inside a club that gets to choose its own members and share out its own riches. The game on the field is almost a beautiful distraction. The real game is the rising value of the seat at the table. So if you ever do buy one, remember the single rule that separates the people who get rich from the people who go broke. Do not buy a sports team to make money on a Sunday afternoon. Buy it for the day you finally sell it. The trophies fade, the seasons blur into one another, and the only scoreboard that has ever truly mattered to an owner is the one printed at the bottom of the contract on the day the next billionaire takes your seat. If you got something out of this, do subscribe, because next week we are breaking down the economics of owning a Formula One team, and the price the bottom teams now sell for will honestly surprise you. And before you go, tell me down in the comments, first, if you had the money, would you buy a safe American franchise for the steady appreciation? Or a European club for the glory and the risk? Second, do you think your own city should ever pay a single penny towards a billionaire's stadium? And third, which team would you actually buy if the check cleared tomorrow? Drop the name below. I read the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.